Okay, welcome back to our webinar presenting the Q2 2020 Property Market Insights by Colliers International Philippines. This is presented in partnership with the Philippine Daily Inquirer through Inquirer Property and the ABS-CBN News Channel. We will now begin our open forum, so let me first introduce our panelists. Can we have Joey back, please? So we will start by introducing some of our panelists. First off, he is the Managing Director of Colliers International Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Richard Raymundo. Hi, Richard. Good morning. Okay, up next, he is the Director for Office Services and Tenant Representation for Colliers International Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Dom Fredrick Andaya. Hi, Dom. Good morning. Okay, and lastly, he is the Executive Director for Real Estate Management Services for Colliers International Philippines. Please welcome Mr. Jet Ilaga. Hi, Jet.
Hi, good morning.
Morning,
morning,
good morning, guys.
Morning, guys.
Okay.
Morning.
All right. So, all right, gentlemen, let's start our conversation. So let me begin with the office sector. This sector took a major hit at the start of the year, and we're now seeing just how much it has been affected this second quarter. So I asked our panel, and perhaps Dom, you can start. What behavior or trends did we see on office leasing on both landlords and tenants side that has led to the current state of the office sector?
Yeah, so nobody was prepared for this one, and I think the initial response by both lessors and lessees are to see how to keep everyone safe. The next one was to engage in a meaningful way so that both parties will be able to survive. There are negative impacts such as on the tenancy side. Those that have limited resources were initially hit by this. They were constrained to downsize. They were constrained not to renew office leases. On the other hand, lessors are trying their best to reach out and help where necessary to keep the tenancy up, because that's a more important thing right now. Tenancy over revenue.
Do we have any comments on Don's answer? Okay, there's actually a connected question from the audience. This is from Nathan Casanova. Is it possible that we will see an all-time low in office completions this 2020?
I believe so. So when we released the first quarter market report, we already made adjustments because of the lockdown by around one quarter. And we've seen adjustments to that increasing to 4 to 6 months. But for those buildings that are still in the early stages of completion, or those that are still in the planning stages, we have seen adjustments already of at least 1 year. And the reasons were already specified by Joey, one of which is the difficulty in getting the labor, because most of them were repatriated back to the provinces. The other thing is the compliance with the strict COVID-19 protocols.
Anybody would care to add to that? Okay. There are tenants that have pre-terminated their leases for this year. And this question is coming from Jason Escartin. He's a viewer. The tenants that pre-terminated their leases, what industry do they come from? Is it from voice or non-voice?
It's from across the industries. So depending on that's what I've said earlier, depending on the resources and the scale of the companies, it doesn't. We have not seen very clear trend with respect to the industries where these companies are coming from, but with respect to the resources that they have and the scale of these companies, I think that's more apparent in terms of their propensity or their vulnerability to re-terminate or downsize at the moment.
But speaking about a particular tenant profile. Our office report mentioned that we have adjusted supply forecast for 2020 and that the office sector supply is now back to pre-POGO levels. I mean, what kind of occupants or tenant profile will likely take over or lead a recovery, a possible recovery for the office sector? And do we expect that POGOs are going to remain and eventually occupy the same space, or will there be muted operations?
Okay, so it's obvious the tenancy profile who will continue taking up spaces, albeit in a much slower pace.
Mm,
These were shown in the first quarter market report, the heat map of industries. So these companies are in the essential industries. The number one of which are the e-commerce companies. The next one that can think about are the technology companies. The other company or group would be the healthcare companies who are expected to continue growing. BPOs, yes, there are still BPOs who continue expanding because they're also catering into the essential industries like e-commerce companies, the big e-commerce companies across the globe.
right.
So these BPO companies continue to take up spaces. Um, so we expect BPOs to lead the rebound. As to when, well, we might see some soon, depending again on the industries that they're catering to. Maybe another one that could sustain the demand is those services coming from the banking and finance, because transactions will
Mm,
continue to proliferate. With regard to the POGOs, well, they're in a very precarious situation right now. There's dependency on government regulations, but I think they'll be able to iron out things soon. And as soon as the travel ban is lifted, we may see growth from this sector moving forward.
okay, anybody from the panel would like to add to that? Joey? Richard? Okay. Um, but we see that expansion in Metro Manila. Is there any indication that it will spill over to sites outside of Metro Manila, like Pampanga or Cebu, Davao?
Yeah, I believe so. It will become more apparent moving forward. It was started by the drive of the government to encourage developments outside of Metro Manila, and this pandemic will force the acceleration of that movement. And that's what Joey was alluding to earlier when he mentioned about the hub and spoke model.
Mm,
So what's happening is that instead of being within Metro Manila right now, because we recognize that a lot of the laborers working in the different offices in Metro Manila are coming from the greater Metro Manila area. You have Cavite, Laguna, Bulacan, even as far as Pampanga and even Nueva Ecija. So with this pandemic, I think it's gonna be a conscious decision coming from companies to establish presence where their
mm.
people are living.
So if we're expecting that BPOs will lead the path to recovery, that surely that means there's a need for more PEZA space, in order to entice more outsourcing tenants. Do we see PEZA responding to this need?
I think, yeah, they've responded actually, because they proclaimed, I think, two buildings in Ortigas recently.
Mm,
But those are part of the transition provision of the AO18, the moratorium of PEZA applications in Metro Manila. Those two buildings were part of those that were lodged into the office of the president prior to the issuance of that AO. But I believe the PEZA and the government have realized that, with the increasing unemployment rate, we need the PEZA companies to continue growing, and um, accordingly, they need to proclaim more PEZA spaces.
okay, thank you,
Yeah,
Dom.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah. Can I just add to what Dom mentioned earlier about
yes, please.
KPOs or outsourcing companies expanding outside of Metro Manila? We have seen that. In fact, I think one segment that has been has been very aggressive in terms of expanding outside Metro Manila, so the medical coding, health information management segment. And based on my conversation with some colleagues from the sector, they're looking at Iloilo and Clark, for instance, for their future expansion. And I was pleasantly surprised that during the lockdown and during the pandemic and during the stricter lockdown, I was pleasantly surprised that there's some medical coding companies based in Fort Bonifacio that are trying to poach employees in Clark and are looking to set up their own offices in Clark. So that just shows you that they have options outside of Metro Manila, and they've been very aggressive in expanding.
Okay, thank you, Joey. Any additional comments on that? Um, Let me turn to property management. So COVID-19 has brought property management at the forefront in combating the spread of the disease in our workspaces. What property management trends have emerged due to this crisis, and how should office developers adjust to these trends?
Hi, Thea.
Yes,
So I'll take
yes,
that.
hello.
So yeah. From the property management aspect, we have seen a lot of changes on how we operate and manage properties during this pandemic. And considering that there's no vaccine yet, so our top priority is how to keep our occupiers, employees, and our managed properties safe and virus free. So having a regular communication and guidance on how the virus spreads, how to protect yourself and others will address the anxieties and shared struggles inside the building. And as what Joey said in his recommendation a while ago, a solid business continuity plans coupled with a strong link and support system with owners and tenants in terms of recommended protocols can mitigate exposures and prevent virus spread. So from the property operations standpoint, we are seeing the value of having an integrated property management software being the most desirable trend that developers are now exploring over the long term. No? And it goes without saying that transition to these software management tools will reduce touch points and eliminate physical interaction. And this includes, of course, it applies to both the old and the new buildings, the upgrading of the building management systems that control the preventive maintenance remotely. We also have the incorporation of the visitor parking management, help desk and concierge system, CCTV and paging system, of course, the proximity cards and touchless elevator systems. New lead buildings are embracing the light and movement sensors on common facilities. And most importantly, the online billing and collection software, which will eliminate the face-to-face meeting. And these are all integrated in the system with just a click of a button. Also, because of the inherent business loss effects of the 14 days quarantine protocols, another long-term trends that we are seeing, which are the subject on most BCP's meetings with our clients, are the provision of additional manpower to augment the current roster. No? And for this purpose, we have suggested the formation of additional relievers and standby teams just in case the incumbent teams are infected, and this includes the appointment or deployment of a safety pandemic officer. That's a new role who is basically trained to handle immediate decontamination, disinfection, and sanitation protocols to immediately restore operation and avoid loss, especially in hospitals, banks, facilities, and telcos, BPOs, and POGOs, which are really, they're susceptible to business loss. No. Another cost drivers in the property management aspect is the provision of shuttle services, a hotel arrangement for staff housing for the frontliners, and of course the limited supplies of the PPEs, including of course the air purifiers and the ultraviolet light. No. So another discussion points during my client engagement is the provision of isolation facilities, and we are also seeing the conversion of, say, driver's quarter to, say, a shower area, wherein most of the frontliners now are using bicycle as a mode of transportation. So the conversion of, say, a parking area to isolation room and shower area will, basically ensure decontamination and disease prevention prior to entry to the building. No? We have also suggested the replacement of biometrics with online attendance tumblers or face recognition of apps and softwares. And there's a lot over the long term and short and medium terms. There's a lot of trends that we are seeing moving forward.
But aside from office buildings, you also manage a lot of residential condominiums. And shifting over to the residential market, what are the new non-negotiables? Because people are living in your buildings 24/7. This is a very different situation than office buildings. What are the new non-negotiables that you've seen on the ground that that your tenants demand in order to feel safe and secure in the building?
Well, that's a good question. No? So on top, these are basically the short and medium term. On top of the mandated no mask, no entry, social distancing, and queuing protocols, we have also trying to ensure that there's no fit-out contractors that can enter to the building without a rapid mass testing or a swab testing. No? So it's non-negotiable. We need to make sure that all the visitors are properly logged in, and we can do a contact tracing immediately, just in case we have we found symptoms. We have also implemented, of course, the vehicle, the provision of hand and alcohol sanitizers for all entering guests. That's non-negotiable. You need to make sure that you will be wearing masks and gloves. Some clients are also installing airport equivalent thermal screening cameras, as an upgrade to the usual handheld, scanners. So likewise, the delivery, we have isolated the delivery distribution centers outside the building, so probably outside the reception area, just so we can eliminate touch points also. And there are a lot of other non-negotiable items specifically for those who are not a resident of the condominium, especially on the residential building. And based on experience, we are handling around 50 cases to date, mostly on residential condominiums. And so far, those who found positive are now, I think, recuperating and in full isolation, whether in the hospitals or in other COVID-19 facilities.
Correct. And these are now the instances, which is why, property management has seen, a huge demand in making sure that the properties are operational and safe. But we've also seen, just connecting for the residential market, we've also seen this sector affected by slower take-up and delayed launches. What's the response that we've seen in the market, and what form of recovery are we looking at? Richard, would you like to take the question?
Well, the most obvious one, I guess, would be on the residential. No, a lot of the developers are just trying to move the inventory that they have right now. Joey has mentioned that there's close to 50,000 condo units in the market right now in Metro Manila. That is the supply in a good year. Last year, it's about 50,000 of new units. So there's enough supply right now. But we believe that there is liquidity in the market. The mortgage rates are low, interest rates are low, inflation still is managed. I saw a question on what is the performance of the residential horizontal market. We've been talking to some of the developers, and in the horizontal market, they're saying that the ones which are priced at around 1.5 to around 3.5, the VAT-free type of residential, is actually moving. So there are people with the intention of buying, and now they're given a little bit of concessions. There are discounts, there are freebies in the market right now. The payment terms are much looser these days. We've seen some movement in that segment. So all it takes sometimes is a little bit of some discounts, imaginative ways in payment terms, and we have seen some movement in that 1.5 to 3.2 million range, particularly in the horizontal market outside of Metro Manila. That is the feedback that we have been getting.
Yes, Thea, I just want to add to what Richard mentioned. He's correct. We've been seeing a sustained demand for housing lot projects outside of Metro Manila. Pampanga, Bulacan, Cavite, Laguna. Some residential projects were even sold out during the pandemic. I've been monitoring a couple of lot-only projects in Pampanga, my hometown, for instance, and the developers have been reluctant to really drop the prices. So, that just gives you an idea of how strong the demand in these locations has been. And I mentioned that one trend for the residential sector is that they've been looking for the second unit outside of Metro Manila. They're looking for less densities and investing in these areas. So that will probably drive the demand going forward, aside from the more affordable packages and terms that the developers have been providing, of course.
I think what we need to watch out for now is, are the banks willing to lend? That's a different ball game. Mortgage rates are low. The government has cut on key interest rates. This is the lowest that we have seen. This is the big difference from the 1997 crisis, when mortgage rates shot up to 20, 25, 30%. Our mortgage rates are low, but are banks willing to give the low mortgage rates, or are they even willing to give out mortgages? We've seen some of the early results of the banks, the performance, and a lot of the banks are being cautious. A lot of the banks are provisioning for bad debts. So that is the other question that we should be looking at, if the banks are going to be willing to do that.
There is a question for Joey from Mark Bello. What change in driving forces do you need to see before you can say recovery in the residential sales will begin?
Well, similar to what I mentioned earlier, there are three key indicators that we're looking at. Let's look at the GDP growth, for instance. So we recorded a 0.2% contraction for the first quarter of the year, and a lot of business analysts, economic analysts are projecting a much deeper contraction for the remainder of 2020. And the last time that the economy contracted, we saw average prices of condominium in Metro Manila declining. This is during the Asian financial crisis. I mean, we had a tough time during the global financial crisis. But even then, I mean, prices only dropped by 1.5% and then recovered quickly, growing by 2% in 2010. So let's look at the pace of economic recovery starting fourth quarter, perhaps. Another key factor is OFW remittances. In April of 2020, we recorded the lowest OFW remittances since 2001. In 2009, 2010, although remittances grew in absolute terms, they slowed in terms of growth. But during that time, I showed that slide earlier, when there was a drop in terms of take-up in the market. So I think we also have to be watch developments in OFW remittances, because anecdotally, this is the segment that drives demand for affordable to mid-income 1.7 to 6 million pesos. One economic indicator that I believe and we believe is a positive for the segment is, as Richard mentioned, the low interest rates, which we hope will translate to lower mortgage rates and will somehow entice banks to be more accommodating in terms of housing loans going forward.
So there are, a few bright spots that we can expect
So
for the coming months.
It's a mixed bag in general, for the rest.
So in addition to that, I think personal consumption expenditure is something to look out for. That is the main barometer of consumption and how people are willing to shell out. The reality is the Philippine economy is consumption-led. We are about 60 plus. Nearly 70% of our GDP is personal consumption expenditure. So it doesn't help if people are liquid but are not spending it. So that would be one indicator to watch out for in this market.
In the interest of time, let's move on to the hotel industry. And I was sad that we weren't able to join the poll earlier. So let me do a quick poll around our panel. When are you willing to travel? Is it in 1 to 3 months or after over a year? Joey, when are you willing to travel?
As soon as the vaccine is released by Moderna, perhaps, I'll
That's probably after over a year, Richard.
Yes, or by Oxford University.
Yeah,
I think it would take a year for us to start thinking of making travel plans.
Okay. Dom?
Likewise.
Same. Jet? Okay.
Likewise.
After over a year, is it domestic or international? Any?
Well, probably domestic.
Probably domestic. That seems safer at this point.
Yes.
So
yes.
we have seen that the leisure sector is still bearing the brunt of these global lockdowns and travel restrictions. is it advisable, given that the sector is looking to adapt and survive, is it advisable for hotels to drop rates at this point? I mean, given the sentiment here at this
I
panel.
think Joey showed that, no, and Joey even
Yeah.
recommend that they need to be cautious with dropping rates, because even if you drop
Yes.
rates now, the demand isn't there. Your tourist arrivals isn't there. Your demand is only coming from the BPOs, the housing of the BPOs, the quarantine facilities, the waiting out facilities. So there's really not much to prop up your demand. Plus, take into consideration that before the COVID, our rates for the brand names were even one of the lowest already in the region. So dropping it further wouldn't make sense. Again, the analogy I say is it's like having a BMW and you're saying that the BMW of the same model and the same make in, let's say, Hong Kong is, let's say, 50% cheaper in Manila. So there comes a point that dropping rates just doesn't make sense anymore for the hotels.
Yeah, I
Agree.
encourage our attendees to
Mhm.
download our hotel report. We have a more comprehensive analysis
Yeah.
of that recommendation in our hotel report. Yeah.
I mean,
And
well,
it
definitely.
also be ideal to share with our attendees the new normal and new trends in property management, which my team prepared for all our clients, just so they
Oh,
have an
sure, sure.
idea on what are the trends and new normal in terms of how to operate the buildings. And
Yes,
that's
because
for
definitely
that's for me.
hotels would need to highlight their sanitation practices now because
That's
people
correct.
would be
That's
more
correct.
careful. Correct.
Right.
And with hotel sectors trying to survive this pandemic, they have offered their facilities, as Joey has said, as accommodations for quarantine travelers, BPO employees, frontliners. But we know that that cannot be the case for all. Is that the only way they can respond to current market conditions, or are there other models or strategies that they can do?
For the hotels, you mean?
For the hotels.
Again, if you look at the hotel, it's not just rooms, right? They have the F&B outlets, they have other outlets. So they need, as you know, as you said in your initial video, you need to reimagine your business. And that's what Colliers is right now. You need to reimagine your business. If you look at the likes of Shangri-La, for instance, they are reimagining the F&B experience. They're doing packed, do-it-yourself burgers now for homes. You can even do it yourself whiskey stars and drinks at home already. That is very imaginative. Is that a long-term solution? Probably not, but you need to respond to what is happening right now. Same for the hotel rooms. Some embrace the BPO accommodation. Some are doing the quarantine facilities for the OFWs and all of that. You need to look at the different segments of your business on how to make it survive. It is survival mode. That's the reality for two segments right now, retail and hotel. It is survival mode.
But definitely, hotels have the resources and the equipment to possibly host, companies or small companies. Dom, do we see any locators actually considering hotels as part of their operations?
Um, yeah, we've seen them use hotels for housing. In the hub and spoke model, the function rooms could be used by the BPOs.
That's
So they use
interesting,
it
though.
as office. That's a
Yeah.
different setup for them if they cannot go to the
Yeah,
office.
because in the hub and spoke model, employees would continue working from home, but if they encounter problems or they just want to be re-energized, they can go to that hub to
Okay.
reconnect, have their laptops repaired or internet connections maintained or repaired also.
So, Jet, these hotels,
Yeah.
they do their own property management, or they also employ third
They
party
they they,
consultants
they
for
have their
that?
own normally they have their own in-house facilities and property management team, but we have a couple of hotels that are currently under management. So I would say most of the branded hotels have their own in-house property and
So
facilities
have
management
you
team.
seen companies using the facilities as an extra space for operations? Or do we have that in our in the
No,
business?
I haven't seen, but I have experience using one of the hotels as a staff house for frontliners,
Mm,
but not for business operation because it's hard to really retrofit the hotel setup into a business you know business office setup. So it's
I
just
see.
purely for staff housing.
So just last round of questions for the industrial sector. Are we seeing any bright spots or opportunities in the industrial sector, and why?
Joey.
Uh,
Sorry, Thea, can you repeat that question, please?
are we seeing any bright spots or opportunities? Because you did say that the industrial sector is the most resilient for
Yeah.
now. What are these bright spots that we're looking at?
Well, one of the bright spots really is the growth of the logistics sector because the growth of e-commerce has really been tremendous during this pandemic and lockdown. And it has, really enticed a lot of developers to modernize their warehouses and even expand their industrial or logistics footprint. Another key and interesting development is that a lot of manufacturers have been moving out of China. And we hope
Mm,
that the
that's true.
Philippines can capture, a portion of all these investments moving out of China after the pandemic, because this will translate to greater industrial and warehouse absorption in key industrial sites such as Calaba region, Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, as well as Clark. And of course, this will bode well for industrial parks being lined up by developers in northern and central Luzon, including New Clark City, because especially manufacturing investments that are into light manufacturing segments such as food and beverage as well as packaging. So this will definitely bode well for those industrial parks being developed in northern part of Metro Manila, because those industrial spaces are mainly catering to these in light manufacturing items.
Do we see a lot of more manufacturers of, let's say, essential items such as medical products, PPEs, or industrial alcohol or something like that?
Yeah, in fact, another one interesting point there, yeah, is that I think this is New Kinpo Group, where they're mainly
Mm-hmm.
into electronic manufacturing, but they pivoted to manufacturing of PPEs and other
Yeah.
sanitation products during the pandemic. And we won't be surprised if we see more manufacturers, pivoting a segment of their production into these essential items going forward.
I think we've seen a lot of, other companies who have shifted their operations to produce more essential items. Did we have some local companies who have shifted to instead manufacturing alcohol, for instance?
Well, we have, such as SMC, for instance.
Mhm.
I know they pivoted to manufacture of ethyl alcohol, just to serve the immediate needs of the population. But in terms of will they do it for the long haul, that has
Mhm.
yet to be seen. Probably they only used it in the interim as they see a spike in the demand in the market.
Okay, so I think we have one last question from Paulo Bengson, and I think this would be our last question. What are the drivers of economic growth this Q4 that the government is hoping for? Do you agree with the statement from the government, or is this just an example of them doing crowd control?
Well, in terms of economic factors, I think somehow similar to what I mentioned earlier, because if you look at office leasing, for instance, this will be dependent on the growth of the economy. You have micro, small, and medium enterprises that account for what? About a third of the total office leasing in the Philippines. These are account for a third. These are the traditional non-POGO, non-BPO companies. And the expansion of the domestic market in general will only result in a greater absorption of office space. But not only that, we also see that in the retail sector, because of course now we have muted demand in terms of consumer spending. And if the remittances continue to flow into the country and we see a greater economic activities, of course, more Filipinos being employed again and joining the labor force, of course, that will result in higher retail and consumer demand going forward. We also talked about residential demand that has been dependent on OFW remittances as well as domestic consumption. And we hope that the low interest rates and mortgage rates in the market will help complement that demand. Of course, in terms of industrial demand, logistics, the household consumption has also been driving the demand for F&B, for PPEs, for other essential items, and that will have a positive impact in terms of logistics demand as well as demand for industrial spaces in Calabar region as well as northern and central Luzon. The only segment I think that is having a difficult time right now, and similar to the graph that I showed earlier, is the hotel sector, because a lot of analysts are projecting that it will take time before the market fully recovers. I mean, if you look at first half of the year, 70% drop in tourist arrivals. We're not likely to see the domestic travel picking up in the near term, especially with localized lockdowns likely to be implemented across the country. So we have yet to wait for these localized lockdowns to be lifted, and for the local governments again welcome local as well as foreign tourists. So in terms of recovery, as I mentioned, it is the hotel segment that probably would be last in terms of its resilience and potential for recovery. IATA is looking at the recovery by 2024, so that does not look good for the entire leisure sector. But I think in terms between domestic or foreign, I think it is the domestic segment that will be first to recover. But it's still a wait and see for a lot of hotel players and even for tourists like us. So let's see what happens by 2021 when that economic recovery expected by the government finally kicks in.
I think a lot of the sectors are actually, at some form in a wait and see mode right now. But I think that will be our last question. Thank you to our panelists from Colliers International, Joey, Richard, Dom, and Jet. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope that our viewers were able to gather new information that will help them, navigate this new normal and get a better sense of what's going on in the market and plan accordingly. So, but now we've come to the end of our webinar. And before we go, we'd like to once again thank our media partners, the Philippine Daily Inquirer through Inquirer Property and the ABS-CBN News Channel. And to officially close our program, let's hear some final remarks from our Managing Director, Mr. Richard Raymundo. Richard, over to you.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining our webinar today. And as you've seen, the pandemic has brought so much uncertainty in the property market. We are now forced to reimagine our business and look at opportunities in the market. And again, at Colliers, we continue to help our clients to wade through the uncertain times. We believe that knowledge and information, timely information, is needed now more than ever. Please reach out to us should you need more information, and together we'll get through this crisis. I look forward to hearing from you and looking at ways to reimagine your business. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you again to everyone who joined our webinar today. You're welcome to reach out to our team if you have further questions or would like more information. On behalf of Colliers International, thank you for being with us. Stay safe and stay healthy. Goodbye, everyone.